Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Annisa Asha. I'm English Department of Yayan Parepare, and now I would like to explain about assessment. The first is about what is the difference between test, assessment, and teaching. The second is about the principle of assessment. The third is about how to design classroom language test. And then the last is about how to create a good test. Okay, for the first, let's talk about what is the differentiation between test, assessment, and teaching. Okay, test is an aspect that plays crucial role in assessment because test is a method of measuring a person's ability, knowledge, performance, or competence to perform language. The example about proficiency test, quiz, answer essay test, to speak, write, a grammatical rule, and etc. And then assessment. Assessment is an ongoing process that includes a wider domain than a test. It is one of component of teaching activities. For example is responding to a question, writing an essay, offering a comment, reading or listening activities. And then next kind of assessment. There are informal and formal assessment. Informal assessment is task a number of firm is designed to elicit performance like nice job, good work, it was fantastic, it's interest, and so on. And then formal assessment is systematic and planned to give an appraisal of student achievement. Okay, next, formative and summative assessment. So, for example, is like a comment, suggestion, and attention to an error. Formative assessments is evaluates in the process of student growth. And remember, all kinds of informal assessment are formative, and most of classroom assessment is formative assessment. And then next is about summative assessment. Summative assessments aims to measure or summarize what the student has grasped and typically occurs at the end. For example, final exam and typically proficiency exam. And then norm references versus criterion references. Okay, first let's talk about norm references. Norm references. Each test taker's score is interpreted in relation to be a mean, median, or standard deviation or percentile rank. For example, test of English as a foreign language, or we called TOEFL or SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test. And then criterion reference is designed to give test takers feedback on specific course or lesson objectives. For example, classroom test. And then next, discrete point and integrative testing. Discrete point assumes that language can be broken down into its component parts and those parts can be tested successfully. For example, reading, writing, speaking, listening, lexicon, syntax, discourse, and so on. And integrative tests are cloze test and dictation. Okay, what is cloze test and dictation? Cloze test is reading passage in which every 6 or 7 word was been deleted. The test takers is required to supply words that if the match into those blanks. And communicative language teaching. So, communicative language teaching involve interactive tasks, example oral interview, written projection, open-ended responses, and group performance. And then we know that there are traditional assessment. Traditional assessment use one shot, or we call it multiple choice, and focus on the right answer. And then the last is computer-based testing. It's a specific type of a test. It starts with question of moderate difficulty to find questions of appropriate difficulty for test takers. And teaching. As we know that teaching is a part of when the teacher confine information or material to the student. So in teaching, we use appropriate methodology, we use media and technology, we use design and strategies for to design a classroom. Okay, and then what is the correlation among them? The correlation among them is in teaching, we need to assess the student. And in assessing the student or give assessment, we need test because test is a part of assessment. And then next is about the principle of assessments. So there are many principles of assessment. The first is practically. Practically is relationship between available resources for the test. For example, human resources, material resources, time, and etc. This resource will be required in design, development, and use of the test. So, Brown defines practically is in terms of the first is cost. For example, when your class conducting mid-test, for one class consisting 30 students in junior high school level, that spends 500,000 for every student. What do you think about that? Sure, it's not practical because the task should not be too expensive to conduct. Okay? And then the second is time. For example, if a teacher wants to conduct a test of language proficiency, that it will take a student 10 hours to complete. Sure, it's not practical because the test should not be too long or too short. And then next about administration. For example, what do you think if a teacher in remote area who his or her student know nothing about computer conducts a test which requires the test takers to at least know how to interact with a computer in order to be able to complete the test? Is it practical? No, because the test should be quite simple for administer and not be too complex to conduct. And then the next is about scoring. For example, what do you think if a teacher conducts a test that will take students a couple minutes to complete and take the teacher several hours to score or to evaluate? It's not practical, sure, because the scoring should fit into the time allocation. And then the second is about validity. For example, if a student is given a reading text about metamorphosis of a butterfly, a valid test will measure the reading ability about specific information of the text. The test should make the student rely on her reading ability to complete the test. And then next is about reliability. It means that test result should be consistent. For example, if we want to conduct a listening test, we should provide a room which is very comfortable to listening environment. The noise from outside the room cannot enter the room. The audio system should clear to all students. Consider the lighting, conditioning of desks and chairs as well. And then the third is authenticity. Okay, the characteristic of authenticity is the language in the text is natural as possible. Topics are meaningful, relevant, or interest to the learners. So if we give the learner tasks, the topics are meaningful and interest the learners. And then real world task. For example, teacher should construct a test with test items are likely to be used or applied in the real context of daily life. And then the fifth about washback. Washback refers to the influence of testing on teaching and learning. The influence can be positive or negative. For example of positive washback, national examination will require students to pay attention to the lesson more attentively, prepare everything, dealing with UN more thoroughly, learn the lesson by heart, and so on. And then negative washback, for example, if the UN or final examination affect teacher to give more focus on the final examination lesson, then they tend to ignore other lessons that do not contribute directly to pass the exam. And then the third is about how to design classroom language test. Okay, here there are 5 critical questions. The first is the purpose. The second is the objectives. The third is the test specification. The fourth is 5 principles of assessment. The 5 is scoring and feedback. Okay, here I will explain about test types. The first is language aptitude test. So, in language aptitude test, for prediction and measure capacity for ultimate success. And actually, it has a limitation and flaw because prediction is not easy to be made. And then, when a person has appropriate knowledge and nice strategies in learning, everyone can succeed. And then, proficiency test. Proficiency tests consist standardized multiple choice items on grammar, vocabulary, reading, and oral part. It is summative and norm references such as TOEFL. And then next about placement test. For divide students into levels and put them into courses and indicate appropriate challenge materials for students. And then next, diagnostic test. Diagnostic test, we are diagnosing specific aspect and purposes and focus on more detailed subcategories information learned. And then next is about assignment test. It is directly related to classroom lessons and it is hurried within a particular material and curriculum in a time frame. So in assignment test, a good one can overwash back for learners' performance quality. And some practical steps to test construction. The first is assessing clear and ambiguous objective by knowing the purpose of the test we are creating, and then determine a simple and practical outlined test result, and decide forms of items, type, and task, and then devising test task by drafting the questions, revising the draft, request aid from college, and imagine yourself as a student who write for this test. And then next, designing multiple choice items by checking practically reliability and facility of cheating. Okay, and then scoring, grading, and giving feedback. So the teacher assign letter grade level depend on culture, context, and relation of English classroom and teacher expectation. After testing, student identification of success and challenge that can be given. And then the third is about how to construct a good test. So, to having good items, a test should have certain characteristics. The first is planning the test. Planning of the test is the first important step in the test construction. The main goal of evaluation The main goal of evaluation process is to collect valid, reliable, and useful data about the students, so that we should, the first is determining the objectives of testing, the second is preparing test specification, and then the third is selecting appropriate item types. And then the second is preparing the test. After planning, preparation is the next in the text constructions. In this step, the test items are constructed in accordance with the table of specification, and each type of test item needs special care for instruction. Function of preparation stage are: the first is preparing test items, the second is preparing instruction for the test, and then the third is preparing the scoring key. And then the step 3 is try out of the test. Once the test is prepared, now it is time to be confirming the validity, reliability, and usability of the test. Try out helps us to identify detective and ambiguous items, to determine this difficulty level of the test, and to determine the discriminating power of the items. The function of tryout is administration of the test and scoring the test. And then the step 4 is evaluating the test. Evaluation is necessary to determine the quality of the test and the quality of responses. Quality of the test implies how good and dependable the test is. And quality of responses means which items are misfit in the test. It's also enable us to evaluate the usability of the test in general classroom situation. So, the function of evaluating the test is item analysis, determining validity of the test, determining reliability of the test, and determining usability of the test. So I think that's all for me, and thank you very much for your nice attention, and I do hope that we always practice to understand about the material, especially about assessment, because assessment is very important to conducting in the classroom. So the teacher must to master to assess the students ability, or the students knowledge, or the students performance or competence in the class. So I have explained about the difference between test assessment, and then test assessment and teaching. So in teaching, as a teacher, um, we as a teacher should know about the student assignment. So to know about that, we need to assess every student in the class, assess their assignment or the result. Uh, Actually, the function of assessment is to give information for the teacher about the students' capability to understand the material that the teacher give in the class. It because when uh, we try to be a successful teacher to enhance the student outcomes. So conducting assessing in the class is very important, because it gives a measuring for a teacher to know about the understanding of the material. And I think that it is very important part in teaching and learning process. And then as like I explained before, that as a teacher we need to know about how to give the good assessment for the students. The assess or the test that we give should be reliability, should validity, and then should consistent. When we're giving a score, uh, we need to be consistent for every students in the class. So I give you remember that it's very important to know about the principle of assessment, uh, as I explained before, because it will give us uh, a more opportunity to give or to create a good assessment when in the class. So I think that's all my explanation about assessment, and then I do hope that everyone can easy to understand about assessment through this video, and I do apologize if I have any mistakes in my explanation. So actually this is my mid test from my lecturer, so I hope that we can master about assessment in the future. So that's why it is very important to know about how to give a good assessment for students, because we as a teacher uh, should know about what is the students need, and then to know that we need to giving test and give assessment for every students about their knowledge, about their competence in the class. So thank you very much for watching this video, and always stay at home, because we are in the crucial condition. Uh, we are should as stop the spread of the virus, and then always practice and practice, especially for assessment subject. We need to more understand. We need to always practice. We need to always broaden our mind to always search about many resources in the internet or in other media to mastering about the assessment subject. And once again, I'm so sorry if I have any mistakes in my explanation. And the last I say, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The more you share, the more you get, and the more you learn.